What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Limited Level Up. So this week, we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of your cards, how to make specific cards tick. Sort of like a zoomed-in version of last week's episode. Last week, I talked about various decks and archetype spaces you might find yourself in Final Fantasy. Today's going to be a similar episode, but instead of focusing on groups of decks, focusing on individual cards and how to draft in a way where you can squeeze the most juice out of every card you have. So yeah, let's just jump in. So I want to start with a quick word about how to best think about and put into practice a lot of the ideas we're going to touch on today. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about is roughly like when you have card A in your pile, you should keep an eye out for card B, C, and D if you want to have card A live up to its fullest potential. And that's kind of like the big theme of today's episode, right? How do you make cards live up to their fullest potential? What you do with that information of these cards play well together isn't so much like, okay, well, if you have card A, you really, really want card B, because if you play those two cards together, like, you can't lose the game. You know, this isn't like a top 10 sick Splinter Twin-esque combo video. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. For me, when I figure out, oh, hey, yeah, card A and card B play pretty well together, the more fruitful thing I get from that info is that I now have more options in each pack to choose from, or I'm seeing more options in each pack. Because when I get past a pack, certain cards stand out to me. They light up. They jump off the screen a bit, right? And the more format knowledge you have, the more cards will light up in each pack as viable options. So with more format knowledge, the not so generically good cards will light up in the packs for you a little bit more often. So when you get to a pick where there's not an obviously great card in your colors, instead of taking a bad card in that pack in your colors, something that's like never going to make your deck, like the Quattrub Forayer, right? That like black 3/2 that like exiles cards from graves and destroys something that's been dealt damage. I almost couldn't even remember the abilities, but you're never going to play that card, right? Instead of taking a card you're just not going to play, a little more often you can go, oh, hey, this pack also has that niche uncommon in the pack that I don't usually play, but it plays pretty well with my rare, and it's a better option than a card I know I'm not going to play. Or here's a card that's not even in my colors, so it didn't immediately jump off the screen to me, but it plays really, really well with the cards I already have, so I could consider splashing it. Or maybe I even pivot into that color if the draft goes a certain way. I've got an example here from a stream the other day, a draft I was doing on stream. So it's pack 1, pick 4, and the cards in our pile are Vane's Treachery, the -2/-2, side quest Hunt the Mark, the 5-mana enchantment that kills something and makes treasure, and Magitech Armor. That's the 4-mana white vehicle that comes in with a 1/1 token. So we get to pack 1, pick 4, and the cards that jump off the screen for me, the ones that kind of light up, are Midgar, City of Mako. This is the rare adventure black land, the one that you can sacrifice an artifact or creature. If you do, you draw 2 cards. Paladin's Arms, the 3-mana job select equipment, and Sorceress's Schemes, the red buy something back from the grave and has flashback. Now, I think a lot of people that are going to be watching this video are thinking roughly the same thing as I am here, where it's like, okay, it's pick 4. I'm not really locked in. I don't have to be exactly black-white, but these 3 cards I have in my pile, they're pretty good. If I can take a black card or a white card to keep on this black-white deck, be pretty flexible, that's a good thing to be able to do. I also think, though, for a lot of people, and I say this because this is how I would have thought about this pack, week 1 or week 2 of the format, going, well, Sorceress's Schemes is the best card here, but it's not really in my colors. It's kind of a blue-red card doing spell stuff. It doesn't really mesh very well with this black-white start. I should probably just take Midgar, which I think is the best card for a black-white deck here. I don't think that would be terrible, but I also think you're probably missing something here if you don't think Sorceress's Schemes plays well with your pile of cards here. It doesn't play very well with Magitech Armor, I will admit. There's not a lot of crossover there, but it plays pretty well with Vane's Treachery, and it plays pretty well with side quest Hunt the Mark. Vane's Treachery is obvious, just buying back a good removal spell. That's something you often do with Sorceress's Schemes. But for the future of this deck, I see it playing pretty well with side quest Hunt the Mark as well, because both Sorceress's Schemes and side quest Hunt the Mark really want removal spells, really want me to draft removal spells very highly. With Sorceress's Schemes, again, you can buy back your good removal, and side quest wants you to kill your opponent's creatures, so you can make a bunch of treasure and then flip to the backside, flip to the big dragon. So when you look at this pack, even though Sorceress's Schemes might light up to you as like, oh, yeah, that's a good card, it's the best card in the pack, that light might dim a little bit, might fade out a little bit when you go, if it doesn't really play that well with my cards in my pile. Especially if you're just thinking about Sorceress's Schemes as just like a blue-red gold card that doesn't play that well with the cards you have, but I think it does, and it's very nice to be able to say, hey, I can still take the best card in the pack here because it's not so far off of what I'm doing. And that's the whole idea of today's episode, being able to make these connections between cards a little bit better. Understanding that sort of spider web of all the cards in the format and how they interact with each other. So when you get to a pick like this, a little more often than not, you get to actually take that card instead of going, that card's not really for me. It's a good card, but it's not for me. Those cards might actually be for you, might be a potential option, but you don't quite have the format knowledge to be able to piece that stuff together just yet. All right, so the way that I've grouped cards today, we've got three main groups. One, cards that are already pretty good, and I want to call out ways that you can make that card even better in your deck, really maximize on the card. Two, cards that aren't so good, but maybe are good in a certain home, or there are ways to make the card pretty good. The bad cards, quote unquote, if you look on 17 lands, how to actually make those playable cards. And then group three, rares. There's actually a lot of rares that I think fall into one of those camps, and I don't get a chance to talk about rares at length very often. Usually we're focused on commons and uncommons, so I figured at this point in the format where most people have played with or against most of the rares, probably a good time to do that. So we're going to start with the cards that are already pretty good and how to make them even better, how to really max on them, how to get to the fullest potential that these cards have. And we're going to start with a real banger here, Choco Comet. The X red sorcery deals X to any target, and you make a 2/2 bird with landfall +1/+0. So this is a great card. And actually, side note, potentially slightly underrated. I think this is the best uncommon in the set, personally. That's where I take it. And I get this card 4th pick, 5th pick sometimes. So I don't know if people are a little bit hesitant to go into red, but this is definitely a card worth going into red to. I have no reservations about that. And while a naked Choco Comet, no synergies, is going to be a really good card in your deck, I kind of think of Choco Comet as a build around of sorts. Because when I have Choco Comet, especially when I start with one, I kind of treat my deck going forward as a Choco Comet deck. With the knowledge that I have this card in my pile, I want to kind of build my deck around it, which means finding it and recurring it, and in some cases copying it. So blue-red, I think, is the best place for Choco Comet. If I start with Choco Comet, I would like to be in blue-red. And obviously, card draw really helps with Choco Comet because not only can you find the Choco Comet more consistently, but you also are able to hit land drops consistently with Choco Comet, which I think is a pretty big part of the card, right? If you can't get up to 6-7 mana, it's a lot less effective. It's still fine if you cast on 4 and kill a 2-drop or something. But I really am trying to go big with my Choco Comets, ideally. That's how you maximize on it. If you're thinking about kind of its function in a blue-red deck, well, I think that blue-red is pretty good at being both controlling and aggressive. Not even necessarily one or the other when you're building your deck, but in-game, blue-red kind of lends itself to being sometimes I'm the beatdown, sometimes I'm the control. You can kind of shift roles there. And if you're, you're curving out in your blue-red deck, you just go Emperor of Palamecia into Shantoto, into, 4 mana non-creature spell. You just have a really good start. Choco Comet can be that finisher, getting the opponent down from 8 to 0 or something, or, just finishing off just the final blow. But you can also have games that are a little more controlling, where you're dealing, 16 damage or something with Choco Comet after recurring it or copying it. Maybe your deck's not that good at dealing early damage, or just the way that, you drew your cards, the order you drew your cards in. Your early cards were removal spells instead of threats, and by the time you get to turn 6, your opponent's still at 18 or something. Well, one Choco Comet's not going to get the job done. So I really like to build my blue-red decks with a late-game plan, an inevitability plan of saying, I'm just going to cast this Choco Comet multiple times. I've taken control of the game, I've killed all your stuff, maybe my threats aren't the best, maybe you've killed some of my threats, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to kill you in a way that is very difficult to interact with. So how are you doing this? Well, Sorceress' Schemes, the aforementioned Sorceress' Schemes, very good at doing this, right? Because this is 3 Choco Comets over the course of a lot of turns. Fantastic card in blue-red in general, but especially when I have Choco Comet, I really want to prioritize it. Quistis Trep is another one. This is the blue 3-mana 2/2 that can flash back a spell from any graveyard. And it's a little bit worse than Schemes because you always have to count it as whatever your total mana available is to you on a turn. Your Choco Comet's going to be that number -3. You would prefer to be able to Schemes on one turn, and then next turn untap with all your mana, and then have a giant Choco Comet. That's a little bit better. But Quistis is still a nice piece of this deck. Also just a fine card in a blue-red deck. But aside from recurring Choco Comet, copying it is also a really good thing to do. So we've got Summon GF Cerberus, which is the 4-mana red 3/3 rare saga, where on the 2nd and 3rd chapter you can double and triple spells respectively. And what I like doing with this card when I have it is trying not to run it out as soon as I can. I mean, there's some games that just like, you just have to, you're like, okay, I'm under some pressure. I got to put a blocker out there. I got to hope that it survives and have a really good turn 5. But more often than not, what happens with this card is it just dies, right? Like, if you're playing a blue-red controlling deck where you haven't presented that many threats, haven't presented that many blockers, your opponent's very likely to have a removal spell by turn 4, and, this doesn't quite work out. Your 4-mana card just dies. But if you can get to a point of the game where the board's been controlled and your opponent has answered, your Shantotos and your Dragoon's Wyverns, the things that were kind of killing them slowly, the Cerberus is a really reliable way to close out the game from there. Just being able to, not even copy your Choco Comet, let's just say, but being able to copy anything. Choco Comet's a very good thing to copy, of course, and that's, I've set up that combo quite a bit. But yeah, my advice would be try to hold your Cerebuses for as long as is reasonable to do. The other card that's sort of interesting, and this is the only time I like playing this card, Aether. And I only like playing this in blue-red when I have Choco Comet. So Aether is the 4-mana artifact that says tap, exile it, add blue mana. And then when you cast your next instant or sorcery with this mana, you get to copy it. So not only is it giving you an additional mana, so X can be bigger with Choco Comet, but, copying it is often game over. If not game over, you stabilize the board extremely well. And yeah, I only really like playing this one if I've got the Choco Comet and I have a lot of payoffs for 4-mana non-creature spells. If you don't have both those things, it's a little bit too weak, a little bit too often. But yeah, if I'm a Choco Comet deck, quote unquote, a Choco Comet deck, I'll play this card if it's right to do so. Another card that's not exactly a combo with Choco Comet, but I like having a copy or two, is called Mountain Chocobo. Just a good card, of course, but it really helps to be able to keep consistently hitting your land drops. And Call the Mountain Chocobo, guaranteeing 2 additional land drops when you've got a Choco Comet in your deck, yeah, that tends to really matter, especially because sometimes when you can't go way over the top with your Choco Comet, you're not copying it, you're not buying it back, the additional 2/2 birds with landfall, just hitting your opponent down a little bit, that can make the difference between a lethal and a not lethal Choco Comet, just being able to pressure your opponent a little bit. All right, next up, we're going to stick with talking about blue-red things. And we've got 2 cards here I want to talk about. And one of the things that I did when preparing for this episode is I went on 17 lands and I looked at the cards that were performing better in the hands of top players than they were in the hands of, the rest of the player base. I think looking at those kind of stats is just like a good litmus test for saying like, okay, here are some cards that people aren't necessarily using to the best of their ability and good players are finding ways to really max on them. And 2 cards that stuck out in quite a big way. These are both 2 gradations higher in the hands of top players than they are in the hands of an average player, are Fire Magic and Realm Sketching. So Fire Magic is the 1-mana tiered red spell that if you just pay 1 mana, it deals 1 damage to each creature. If you pay 3 mana total, it deals 2 damage to each creature. And if you pay 6 mana, it deals 3 damage to each creature. So there's actually a lot of things going on here, why it might be performing better in the hands of top players compared to the rest of the field. One, with any field wipe effect, generally top players or good players tend to be able to use these a little bit better, right? Because it's the kind of card that's not always just good when you cast it, right? It's not just always going to be like, oh yeah, I cast this, good things are going to happen. The more controlling your deck is, the more that will be true. But it's not always the case where you put this card in your deck and you're like an ultra controlling deck. A lot of the time, this will kill a lot of the creatures that you have. And that might be a good exchange still, might be still, even though if you kill some of your creatures, it might be good to wipe the board. But I think a good player is going to be able to make that determination a little more often and with a little more confidence. Also, I think with this card in particular, looking for spots where just the 1 mana deal 1 to everything is pretty good. You often think of this card as the main modes are the 3 mana and 6 mana mode, but look for times where the 1 damage thing matters, especially post-combat. That's where I use it most, where it's like, okay, I can block in such a way where I just deal 1 damage to everything, maybe even some of my stuff survives and all their stuff dies. But I think there is a deck building component to this too, where I am looking to play Fire Magic with some particular cards to make it better, because I have had Fire Magic in decks where it's just not very good, right? It kills most of my stuff. And, even as kind of the controlling-ish deck, I have a bunch of Dragoon's Wyverns and no cards that have high toughness. So most of the time when I cast this, it's going to be a real board wipe rather than a engineered board wipe where I just kill my opponent's stuff. Because that's what you're really trying to get out of this card. You're trying to make it so you can engineer some situation, either in deck building or in gameplay, where you kill all your opponent's stuff, but not killing any of your stuff, or not killing much of your stuff. I think the first thing when it comes to deck building is this is almost exclusively a blue-red card. I mean, I could imagine some sort of like bigger red-green deck or, kind of a multicolor deck splashing this card, a multicolor green deck. But I think the mistake a lot of people make is they see this card in play, they see how good it can be, just that, wipes their whole field and their opponent's field stays around, and they just put it in any deck, right? And it's, of course, not very good in your aggressive decks. You just don't really want to field wipe very often. And even kind of some of the more mid-rangey decks, it's not exactly what you want. Yeah, right? Maybe your mid-range deck is a little more proactive, a little bit less interested in prolonging the game, a little more interested in attacking. And sure, you can imagine spots where it's like, hey, I face an aggro deck, and it's going to be excellent. But I think if you're going to play Fire Magic, you really want to play it in a deck where you have a low creature count, or you really care about spells, or you have some creatures that get really big or have high toughness, so you can make it a one-sided field wipe. And I think blue-red is the best home for that. Specifically, the 2 gold cards actually play very, very well with Fire Magic, Emperor of Palamecia and Shantoto. Emperor of Palamecia plays really nice with it because you can get to the 6-mana mode a little more often, but also the Emperor grows, right? The Emperor puts counters on itself, so you can get the Emperor to a 4/4 or 5/5 where it actually survives Fire Magic. And then, of course, with Shantoto, very nice because there are no modes of Fire Magic that kill Shantoto, right? So no matter what, your Shantoto is going to stick around. So basically, the more gold cards you have, the more blue-red gold cards, the more Emperors and Shantotos you have, the more Fire Magics I want, or just the fewer creatures you have. Like, I've had blue-red decks that have, 7 real creatures that, I'm like, okay, I'm very often just going to want to wipe the field. I'm not going to kill most of my stuff. That's the place I think you really, really want Fire Magic. So yeah, the differential between how this is playing in the hands of good players and in the hands of, the rest of the field, it's a lot of factors, right? It's a lot of deck building factors. It's a lot of gameplay factors. But when it comes down to it, I view this as a blue-red card. Realm Sketching is another one that, this one's interesting. So this is the 2 blue sorcery that says create a token that's a copy of target artifact, creature, or land. So the baseline for this card is, once again, I think it is a blue-red card because most of the time when you cast this card, you're not going to copy an amazing thing. You're not copying an amazing 7-drop. You're not copying your opponent's Sin all that often, which is the dream, of course. Most of the time, you're going to copy like a 3 or 4 or 5 mana creature. And when that's the average case scenario, it's not good enough. So you're really hoping that you care about other things about this card, right? So either it's going to trigger your 4 mana value non-creature stuff. That's ideal, because if you consider this just as like a 4 mana thing that you can cast on turn 4, is a creature that affects the board, but also triggers your Shantoto, that's really, really good. Like, I'm just happy, even if I copy, a 3/3 or something. I'm not so sad about that. Or you have this as sort of a stand-in for Choco Comet as a really, really good late game thing to do, where you recur it and flash it back a bunch. Basically, you just copy one good thing, and then you can keep on copying that thing over and over and over again. Sort of a nice little package of an inevitability engine. That's where I really like Realm Sketching. Also, just like Fire Magic, I think this has some gameplay components to it, where you can really maximize it on it in-game, where, don't forget that this copies artifacts and lands, so it can be a removal spell if you copy your opponent's White Auracite. It can be, I don't do this very often, but I've done this once, it can be the final landfall trigger you need, right? For, you've got some Chocobos lying around, and you copy a land, and you get a landfall trigger. Like, look out for that line, too. So yeah, lots of in-game stuff that's going on with this card. Also, one nice little combo is Realm Sketching plus the Cerberus, the copying saga, because if you can copy that, yeah, that's amazing, right? You get 3 of the Cerberuses, and then it's just like, okay, that's game over, right? Like, as long as you can copy one other thing, cast one more spell after that, there's very, very little chance your opponent can win that game. And I just want to call out Blazing Bomb while we're on the topic of blue-red, because I think this is a card, this is a card that I've shouted out a few weeks ago, maybe even, multiple times in the past few episodes, but I really would suggest playing more Blazing Bomb in blue-red. The idea is that if you can play Blazing Bomb on turn 1, by the way, this is the 1 mana 1/1 that gets a counter on it when you trigger the non-creature 4 mana spell thing, sack it to deal its damage to target creature. You play this card on turn 1, and it's kind of an investment removal spell, right? Something you only have to invest 1 mana into, and maybe later it kills a 3 or 4 mana creature. And this matters because a lot of the time in blue-red, what happens is you have these hands where you maybe don't have that much removal, or you have some expensive removal in hand, and the rest of your hand is card draw, right? It's like Dreams of Laguna and Combat Tutorial, and you're spending all this time drawing cards and putting yourself up cards, but maybe you're not that good at affecting the board, right? So if you just play Blazing Bomb, it not only can, kill a 2-drop some of the time, but it lets you invest mana on an early turn and then lets you draw a bunch of cards, and then you can kill your opponent's threats. It's just nice to be able to say, hey, I can spend the early turn setting up, hitting my lands, drawing cards, and I'm not going to fall behind. And, of course, sometimes with your blue-red decks, you do just have a nice beatdown going on. You can go bomb into good 2-drop, into good 3-drop, and the bomb is just going to be a pretty good threat that actually attacks. I was cutting Blazing Bombs for my blue-red decks as, like, you know, kind of the worst cards in my deck quite often in the early parts of the format, but I've really come around on that. I generally don't cut Blazing Bomb. The first 2 copies, at least. You know, once it gets to the third, that's probably a little bit too low impact. You only really want to draw 2 max in your games. But I would really like to have one on turn 1. I think your blue-red decks that start with a bomb on turn 1, those games feel a lot better than the ones that don't, I found. Okay, next up on our list of good cards that I think you can really maximize on are the cards that make the 0-1 wizard tokens. So we're talking Corner by Black Mages, we're talking Black Mage's Rod, we're talking Circle of Power. And the thing that I've really come around to when I've got some of these cards is I just want to be going all in on spells, right? These cards just say, I want spells, I want spells, I want spells. And I've been talking a little bit when I've talked about Corner by Black Mages in the past about how it's not really a green-black card very often. And I think that's really the reason why. I mean, you can make some arguments about, you know, green-black is going over the top and reanimating stuff, and this little incremental effect isn't exactly what it wants. That's true. But I think mostly it's that if you're not triggering the wizard very often, you don't get as much as you'd like to out of the card. Kind of the same thing with Circle of Power, right? With Circle of Power, which is the 4-mana draw 2, make a wizard token, lose 2, and your wizards get +1/+0 and gain lifelink until end of turn. This is quite a bad card, actually, if you're just like, okay, 4-mana, draw 2, lose 2, make a wizard. It's a bad card if you're not consistently triggering that 0-1 wizard token and pinging them out of the game. So oftentimes in the last little while, I've started down this black path of just starting with Corner by Black Mages or Circle of Power or whatever it is. And I'm just like, yes, let's just take spells, 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 spells. And, you know, that sounds kind of obvious, of course, but it's really, I'm really encouraging the push to go really deep, really all in, trying not to actually pick up creatures if you could help it. That's kind of the idea here. I was listening to Limited Resources this week, and they put it really nicely when talking about these wizards, where it's like, when you get 2 of them in play, you feel like you're really doing it. Like, you really feel like, okay, my engines are online, and every spell I cast brings me a little bit closer to killing the opponent. But once your opponent gets, like, the 3rd wizard on the board, it's just like, oh, man, like, I'm not beating this. Like, I need to spend actual removal on my opponent's 0-1 wizards, or I'm just gonna die. So yeah, when you have Black Mage's Rod and Cornered and Circle of Power, do the thing. Do the thing as much as you can. Take the spells. Every single card that is a spell or a non-creature that makes a wizard, I'm just gonna prioritize super, super highly. And then when it comes to Circle of Power, don't forget about that last line of text. Wizards you control get +1/+0 and gain lifelink until end of turn. Because, well, yes, that is mostly going to affect your 0-1 wizard tokens. There's actually quite a few random wizards lying around. So, you know, often these decks veer into the Grixis territory because that's where you get a real density of spells. And literally all of the blue-red gold cards in this set are wizards. So Emperor Palamecia, Shantoto, but also at the rare level, you got Vivi, that's a wizard, and Tella, Great Sage, is a 5-mana 3/3 that makes hero tokens when you cast non-creature spells. That is also a wizard. So don't forget about that. We've also got Kefka, which is the Grixis Mythic. That's also a wizard. And Kuja, of course, the black-red rare, which is equally important to keep an eye on how many wizards you have, because Kuja says when you have 3 other wizards, you get to transform it to the backside, which is, you know, a very good backside. And you kind of shortcut that in your head just thinking, okay, the number of wizard tokens I have to have 3 wizard tokens. But I've had Kuja on a board before where I didn't actually realize I had enough wizards already. I played it and it flipped immediately. And if you can flip Kuja immediately, it's actually pretty nice because it gets it out of range of a lot of removal spells, right? It turns into a 4/6 on the backside. So a 4-mana Thunder Magic can no longer kill it. They have to actually pay 7 mana to be able to kill your 4/6. And maybe a Punch spell, maybe Chocobo Kick. So yeah, do not ignore that wizard line of text. And it comes up a little more often than you might think. Next up, some town cards. And I've gotten a lot of questions about these individual cards for the town decks this week. So we've got quite a few powerful payoffs for the town deck. You know, we've got Travel the Overworld, which is the 7-mana draw 4 affinity for towns. We've got the rare land, the Balaam land. We've got Omega Heartless Evolution, which is the 7-mana blue-green 8/8 that locks things down and gains life based on the number of non-basics you control. We also have some lesser generically good cards, but good when you have enough towns, I think. So Pew Pew UFO, the 2-mana 0/4 flying that you can tap to put a land from your hand on the battlefield, and then you can pay 3 also to make its power equal to the number of lands you control until on a turn, and Wandering Minstrel, the blue-green 1/3, that says your lands enter untapped, and if you have 5 towns at the beginning of combat in your turn, you make it 2/2 that's all colors. So let's just start with Travel the Overworld first, because this is the one that I've gotten the most questions on. Do I like the card? Where do I like the card? How highly do I take it? Because I've done a lot of drafts lately that I posted to YouTube where I haven't really called the card out in a pack, and people are kind of like, oh, yeah, do you not like that card at all? What's going on here? So one of the reasons that I don't take it very highly, even though I do think it's a really good card, it's a strong card, is there's a lot of good versions of this effect in the format. There's a lot of really good card advantage between Dreams of Laguna, Combat Tutorial, the Black Revelation. Like, there's a lot of ways to go up cards. And this is one with a much higher barrier to entry than those cards, right? This is much more of a big payoff. I'm closing at the game with this card draw spell, rather than a card like Dreams of Laguna or Combat Tutorial, which can help you hit your land drops. So I don't generally include it in my decks that might want card draw just generically, because there's better options. But if I do have enough towns, like if I'm in the town deck, then yeah, it's good. And I actually will a lot of the time take it over a card like Combat Tutorial if I think I can enable it. Omega is another card that I get some questions on, like, oh, did you not consider that card in the pack? Or, you might want to splash it. You're like, a blue-red deck, would you ever consider splashing Omega in a blue-red deck? The problem with splashing Omega is that it needs more help than most cards you would generally want to splash. Because not only do you need to find enough sources in your deck for it, like you need to have at least 3 green sources in your blue-red deck, but you also actually have to have those sources be non-basic lands, and ideally, you have more than 3 sources. You've got 4 or 5 tap lands in your deck. Because Omega on fewer than, 4 lands that it triggers off of is not going to be very good. Like, I've done quite a few deck techs this week where Omega is the first card I cut because the deck literally only has 1 non-basic land in the deck, and it's just not going to be good at that point. So Omega's good, but it's not really a card I speculate on in the draft very often. Just like Travel the Overworld, I only really take it if I think I'm going to be a multicolor town deck. And a lot of the same things can be said for the Pew Pew UFO and the rare, the Wandering Minstrel. And one of the things that I really encourage doing when you're in this town space is not just picking up enough lands, right? Not just picking up enough towns, something in the 4+ range, but also ways to go search out those lands, because you can't put 8 tap lands in your deck, right? Like that's just going to cause you mana problems. Ideally, you've got 5 or 6 of them, and then ways to search them out. So Prisha's Wanderings, the 3-mana ramp spell that goes and gets a basic or a town. I like this card a lot in my town decks. I really, really would prioritize it if you have these town payoffs. But then a really weird one here. And, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I was going on the list of cards that are performing in the hands of top players better than the hands of the rest of the field. And this card was the most improved card, I believe. Maybe Secrets can prove me wrong on this, but I didn't do a full in-depth look. But as I was scanning the cards, Reach the Horizon, the 3 and a green sorcery that says search your library for 2 lands, either basic lands or town cards, put them to the battlefield, and then shuffle. This card was the most improved card, going from a D level card to a C level card, which, a C level card is nothing to write home about. But I think if you're looking at this card as, yeah, I would like to put this card in my town deck to make my Travel a good payoff, to make my Omega a good payoff, and it's a way that I can increase the virtual number of towns in my deck without actually needing to play 8 tap lands, that makes a lot of sense there. This is the exact kind of card that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, where it might not cross your mind at all to take it. It might not light up in a pack. But if you're at all in this town space, I think it should. All right, and then the last card here on the list of generically good cards that you can make even better with some deck building choices is Lock Cole. And this one's a little bit more just some fun interactions I want to call out. 1 blue-black for the 2/3 lifelink Death Touch, and when it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. So the Wombo combo, the absolute combo, is Lock Cole plus Nibelheim of Flame, the 2 red sorcery that says choose target creature you control, and it deals its damage to all of the creatures. Well, not only does Death Touch kill everything, but lifelink means you're gonna gain a hell of a lot of life with this combo. So yeah, nice little thing for your Grixis spells deck. There's also something that's come up pretty often for me as I've been drafting more of the Black Wizard stuff, where Black Mage's Rod, the equipment, the wording on this card is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent, right? So whatever it's equipped to, which means that if you put this on a lifelinker like Lock Cole, each non-creature spell you cast will drain the opponent, not just ding them for 1. So nice little thing there. I had a game this week where my lock hole was tapped because of a sleep magic, and my opponent had been pressuring me pretty well, and I was just able to stabilize because I put my rod on the tapped lock hole. Like, not something you usually do. You don't put equipment on creatures that can't attack or block, but that was the thing that actually stabilized me. A little bit of life gain. Also, a super weird interaction that I didn't even notice at the time, but the YouTube comments pointed this out to me. So the card Ancient Adamantoise, which is the 5 green mythic, has a lot of abilities, but one of the abilities is damage isn't removed from this creature during cleanup step, and all damage that would be dealt to you and other permanents you control is instead dealt to this creature. Well, if you're looking to kill an Ancient Adamantoise, Death Touch is a really, really good way to do it. And I actually had the exact combo where I just talked about, where I had Black Mage's Rod and Lock Hole, and I didn't see this at the time, but if I had just equipped my Rod till my Lock Hole, I could just cast any non-creature spell. The ping would deal damage to my opponent. It would be redirected to the Ancient Adamantoise, and it would actually kill the Ancient Adamantoise with the Death Touch ping. So that was kind of a cool little thing. I don't imagine that'll come up very often, but it was interesting enough that I thought I would share. And if you are enjoying the show and you would like to support in some way, go check out the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. We are not a sponsored podcast. We don't really run ads on this podcast. The Patreon is what keeps us going, and I really do appreciate everybody over there who supports each week. Go check it out, either if you're interested in supporting the show or if you're interested in the perks over there that we have that, those range from deck tech help in the Discord and draft log reviews to coaching at the higher tiers. So yeah, something, a little something for everybody that wants to get better at Limited Magic. Go check that out. Of course, there's also the Limited Level Ups Discord, like I just mentioned. Links to both the Patreon and the Discord in the description. Also, the Discord is free. By the way, a lot of Discords these days are kind of gated off. This is a free, limited community. I think it's a really great place to be. Very proud of the community we've built over there. So yeah, thank you once again for everybody who supports, and let's get back to the show. All right, now let's take a look at some cards that are not so generically good. The cards, if you look on 17 lands, have quite poor win rates, but I want to highlight some spots where they should be lighting up in a pack for you. And shout out to my friend and set review partner, Mark, because he posted a nice list in the Discord of cards that he thought would be a good idea to cover today. So a lot of these are actually from that list. So thank you, Mark, for giving me some ideas. First one I want to talk about is Phoenix Down. This is the white mana artifact. You can pay 2, tap it, exile this artifact, choose 1, return target creature with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, or this mode doesn't come out basically ever, exile target skeleton, spirit, or zombie. So not a very strong card. A card that has a very, very poor win rate, but I think there are a couple of places you want to play it. Mostly when you've got a busted good rare, like a Kuja or a Dion or something like that. Just, what are the tippity top rares in the set that this can reanimate? I could entertain playing it there, right? It still won't be a thing I'm actively looking for, and my 23rd card might still be better than Phoenix Down, but Phoenix Down could make it as a 23rd card. Another place I like it, though, is when I have Delivery Moogle. And this was actually, I'm a little more likely to play it here. So Delivery Moogle is the 4-mana 3/2 flyer. Then when it enters, you search your library or graveyard for an artifact with mana value 2 or less, you reveal it, put it into your hand, and you shuffle. So Phoenix Down's a really nice kind of toolboxy thing to be able to go get with Delivery Moogle, because, of course, the idea is you play your Moogle, and if it dies, maybe they kill it with a removal spell, maybe you trade it off in combat, your Phoenix Down can then reanimate it, and then you can go get another artifact. And you can't loop these, unfortunately, because Phoenix Down does exile itself, so it's not some sort of infinite combo, but it's still a lot of value, right? It's like your value creature goes and gets something that reanimates your value creature, and then you go get some more value. So yeah, still kind of the same idea where, I'm not always going to play this if I have Delivery Moogle, but it might be better than, your third Monk's Fist or something like that when you're in a white aggro deck. Next up, we've got Quina Coup Gourmet. This is the 3-mana 2/3 that says whenever you make 1 or more tokens, you make those tokens plus a 1/1 frog token. So this is a card that I think on a previous episode I said this is only a green-white card, right? You don't really want this anywhere else. I still think that's mostly true, but as I played more, there are more spots where I want to consider it, or more spots where, as I'm drafting, it lights up in the pack, even though I'm not exactly green-white. So green-white has the highest density of tokens, but I also think there's some place for it in like a black-green deck. Because one of the things about Quina is it doesn't just say whenever you make a creature token, it cares about any token. And treasure tokens, of course, count for that. So if you've got some side quests, Hunt the Marks, or Namazu Traders, or Undercity Gyro Rats. Like, the more of that kind of card I have, the more I'm going to want to play Kuina. And just to give you some counts of how many tokens I think you have to have in your deck to want to play Kuina, it's probably something like 8 or 9, so it's pretty difficult to get there. But if you've got like 4 of these treasure-making cards in black, plus, there are a good number of token-making cards in green, yeah, it's perfectly doable. I also think in blue, it's possible as well, because Dragoon's Wyvern, that makes a token. Retrieve the Esper, that makes a token. Realm Sketching, that makes a token. So there's some cards scattered here and there. So yeah, keep your eye out for Kuina being good. It's got a few more applications than just in green-white. Next up is World Map. This is the single mana artifact that you can pay 1, tap sack, search for a land, a basic land, put into your hand, or 3 mana, tap sack, search your library for a land card, any land, put into your hand and shuffle. So this card at a baseline is a pretty clunky way to fix, right? You're basically paying 2 mana to go get a basic land at some point. That's a little bit below rate, right? You're going to affect your curve out a bit there. But I also think it's a little bit underrated in that, while that's not an amazing baseline to have, I think people pass over this card in packs as like, I should never play this card, or I should never speculate on it. In a lot of my coaching sessions I've done recently, we've gotten to the end of the pack, and just like, that situation I've been talking about, you kind of take a crappy card in your colors that you're never going to play. Instead of taking a crappy card of your colors that you're never going to play, I would instead speculate on World Map, because you never know when you're going to open a Dion or some busted card. And when you have that busted card, it's worth playing something like World Map to be able to enable it. Also, just like I was talking about with Precious Wandering and Seek the Horizons, this is another way to get more town cards in your deck without actually needing to play more tap lands. So that's kind of nice for the town deck. Also, you could consider World Map as a synergistic land in a wizard deck, a deck that's heavy on the wizard tokens, because this is effectively a land that will trigger those whenever you cast a non-creature spells. And just a note about this kind of card generally, because, a lot of people ask, do you replace a land with this? Do you count this as an 18th land? What's the deal there? I think it depends on the deck. Sometimes I play this in the land slot, right? I play 16 real lands and World Map, but sometimes I put this in my spell slot. So I have 17 real lands plus World Map. When you're trying to decide, should I put this in basically my land slot or in my spell slot, if you have multiple colors, if your curve's a little high, I'm going to probably count this as a pseudo 18th land. So this counts as one of my 23 spells, and then I play 17 regular lands. If my curve is low, if I'm not splashing, if I don't have tough mana requirements, no double black, no double blue, then I'm a little bit more likely to just put this in the actual land slot, right? I can replace a basic land with it. I find more often than not, the decks that want a World Map are splashing or have a highish curve, or have a few factors that just make me not really want to cut a land. So most of the time, this is just in there as one of my 23 spells. But, look for the times when you're like a very streamlined red-black deck or something, where you just have a lot of the wizards, and you're not splashing, and you have a low curve, and you can kind of play as a synergistic land. Then we've got some of the artifact payoff cards in blue that, again, have very low win rates on 17 lands. So these are Valkyrie Aerial Unit, the 7-mana 5/4 flying with affinity for artifacts, and when it enters, you surveil 2. And Cargo Ship, the blue 2/3 flying vigilant vehicle, crew 1, tap to add a colorless, spend this only to activate a artifact ability or cast an artifact spell. Both these cards are really strong, and I think they just suffer from people putting them in decks where you don't have enough artifacts. Because if you don't have enough artifacts, your air unit's going to be a 6-mana card a lot of the time, your Cargo Ship is just going to be a Sky Skiff kind of crappy vehicle. If you're not able to enable these cards consistently, which means most of the cards in your deck are supporting it, yeah, they're going to be pretty bad. But sort of like I was talking about with the wizard stuff, where I go, yeah, I really want to go all in on this deck. Look for spots where you've got an artifact deck, where you're going a little more all in. You've got a lot of job select equipment. Your removal spells are a few white aura sites. I think to make these cards good, both of them, you need an artifact count of like 13 at a minimum, right? That's like a bare minimum. And if you have that, I think they're actually going to be pretty good. And if you don't, they're going to be what their 17 lands win rate is. I think these cards in particular also highlight a bit of a quirk in card evaluation, where there are cards that you look at and you go, this is for that deck. This is for the artifact deck. This is for the spells deck. That's obvious. But there's a difference between a payoff that's just like, hey, this is pretty good in any spells deck where you've got, 8, 9 spells, or an artifact deck where you've got, any amount of artifacts. Like, I just need one artifact on the battlefield, and this card will be good. My payoff card that cares about artifacts will be good. There's a difference between those cards and cards that say, hey, your entire deck needs to be this card type for this card to be good. And when you're evaluating cards, both preset and also as you start learning a set, and even, at this point in form, it kind of deep into a set. If you can make that distinction between, yeah, I'm the artifact deck, but do I want a cargo ship, or am I happier with a non-artifact that is just going to be better in this deck? I think thinking about that kind of stuff is pretty important. Next up, I've got a card that has made its way into my deck as the 23rd card a lot recently. So this is Adventurer's Airship, Struggler's Copter, as people are fondly calling it. The 3-mana, 3/2, Crew 2 flying vehicle that when it attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. So I like this card mostly in decks like Black-White or Green-White, where you're pretty good at stalling out the board, and you want to be getting in chip damage, you're mostly proactive, but also you're low on card filtering, card selection, right? When so many decks in this format have access to good card draw, good card filtering, you often feel very disadvantaged as like the heavy white deck that doesn't have any of that stuff, right? You're very much at the whims of however you draw your cards, just whatever's on the top of the deck. So I really like the Airship as a serviceable way to get through those lands, or if you need to find lands, that also is something. But most of the time in these white decks, you're looking to pitch lands. It's kind of a variance buster, right? A way to smooth out the natural variance of limited when your opponents do get to do that and you don't get to. You really kind of feel that sometimes. I think Black-White is probably the deck I've most found myself liking it, because that's a deck where I'm aggressive, but not like purely aggressive sometimes. Yeah, I can play a bit of a slower game. Green-White, more often than not, is like, let's just kill you, let's just get you dead. But in a Black-White deck where you can kind of take the slightly more mid-rangey role, and also you have good removal, right? Removal plays pretty well with vehicles, because if you're tapping a creature, you're taking a creature out of the combat equation. That gives your opponent an opportunity to really smack you back really hard, and so you want to interact some way. So you get good removal in Black-White, you're stalling up the game to some degree in some games, and you get access to some card filtering, which is cool. The last card I want to talk about for this section, this one's very niche, is Self-Destruct. This is the 1 red instant. Target creature you control deals X damage to any other target, and X damage to itself, where X is its power. The one deck that I liked this card in was when I had 3 Shantotos, because with Shantoto, it's fairly easy to combo kill with Self-Destruct. Not only is it easy to combo kill, but you can just cast it as a serviceable removal spell early, right? It's like 2 mana, deal 2 with Shantoto, so it's not just dead. And when you have Shantoto on the battlefield and like another removal spell or another spell that gets a blocker out of the way, you can often go like, okay, cast a removal spell, get a blocker out of the way, maybe cast another cheap spell, hit you for 6, cast Self-Destruct, hit you for the last 8. I would not play this card if I didn't have 3 Shantotos, and it also really helps that this is a blue deck where I'm drawing a bunch of cards. So if I have Self-Destruct and it's a little bit dead early, it doesn't matter as much because I'm seeing a lot of cards, so 1 dead card is a little more forgivable. So you have to have a lot going on there, but I just wanted to call it out as kind of a fun and interesting thing to do. Still a 23rd card, of course, but not a 0. All right, and let's close out today's episode by talking about some rares. So some of these rares are just good rares that I think you can make even better. You can make them live up to their full potential if you're prioritizing certain cards. And some of these are rares that are not very good, not cards you're looking to first pick, cards that you get very late or sometimes wheel, but I think has some applications. The first one we talk about, first grouping of cards, definitely that second one, and that is the Cycle of Crystals. So this has been a really common question I've gotten, just like, what's the deal with these? Do you ever play these? How good are these? The baseline is they're not very good. Most of them kind of suck. And I think for the green one and the red one in particular, I don't really think there's a spot I would want to play them. The green one just is really a bad rate. This is the one where you can pay 6 mana to put 2 counters on 2 creatures, and you get to double the amount of counters whenever you put a counter on something. There's not enough +1/+1 counters in the set to really get value out of that static ability. And paying 6 mana just to put 4 counters on creatures, like that's also pretty darn bad. So I don't ever think you should play Earth Crystal. Fire Crystal is a little bit less bad. This is the one that copies a creature and it gives your tokens haste, and you have to sacrifice that thing you copy at the end step. So it's not quite as terrible, but still pretty bad. I don't really think there's a deck where I would play this over, any reasonable spell. The other 3 are much more interesting though. I think the best of the bunch is the Darkness Crystal. This is the black one that says whenever an opponent's creature would die, you exile instead and you gain 2 life. Then you can pay 6 to put one of those creatures that got exiled with the crystal on the battlefield under your control, tapped, and with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So I think this card's actually pretty solid in a red-black deck or like a Grixis deck where you just have a lot of removal spells. A lot of time you can end up in a spot in the draft where you prioritize a lot of removal, you just take it all very highly, and then it's kind of hard to convert that removal into a win somehow. especially if you're not playing blue. Because if you're playing blue, you can just like, okay, I'll draw a bunch of cards and I'll win with my Dragoon's Wyverns, some cheap little creature, some cheap little flyer. But if you're like red-black with not as much card advantage, a lot of times you can just go like 1-for-1 you, 1-for-1 you, 1-for-1 you, and now we're just kind of sitting here. So the Darkness Crystal is a bit of a solve to that, and I have played this card exactly in that spot in a red-black deck where it kind of needed a finisher. This card also has the advantage of turning off death triggers and cards in the graveyard that your opponent might recur. You get to shut off all of their kind of graveyardy stuff. Gaining 2 life is pretty good. So by far, I think this is the most playable one in kind of like a removal pile deck. The white one, I think, is the next most playable one. This is the one that you can give all your creatures flying and lifelink. I don't love this one, but I think that if your white aggro deck didn't quite get there, you're like a white artifact aggro deck where, maybe you don't have the best ways to push damage, you don't have that much evasion, and kind of just like job select equipment that may not be able to get in, I think you can play this card. I think you want to care about the artifact to some degree. Also, it's got this line of whenever you gain life, you would gain twice that much instead. So if you've got like the staff, the white mage's staff, that's a nice little bonus. I would consider it there. Unlike the Darkness Crystal, where I view that card in the right deck as, oh, this is actually a pretty good thing to do, I see the Wind Crystal a little more as like, yeah, your deck didn't quite get there, and this might be a decent way to eke out a win or two. And then we've got the Water Crystal. This is the one that says you can pay 6 to have each opponent mill cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. And if your opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many plus 4. So each mill is actually milling 5. Sort of similar to the Darkness Crystal, where I could see you playing this card in a deck where you just ended up with a lot of card draw and removal and not good, reliable ways to close out the game. I don't like it as much as the Darkness Crystal because in the meantime, you're not gaining life, you're not shutting off your opponent's graveyard strategy. This one is a little bit closer to the Wind Crystal where it's like, yeah, your deck didn't quite get there, but maybe you can eke out some wins with it. But certainly not a 0. So just to put a stamp on this, my crystal power rankings are number 1, the Darkness Crystal, number 2, the Wind Crystal, number 3, Water Crystal, number 4, Fire Crystal, and at the very end, probably should never play this, the Earth Crystal. Next up, we've got a weird one, Zodiark Umbral God. This is the black, 5 black mana symbols, 5/5 indestructible creature. This says when it enters, each player sacrifices half the non-god creatures they control of their choice, rounded down. And whenever a player sacrifices another creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on Zodiark. So this card is pretty strong if you can cast it. Like indestructible, probably 6/6 or 7/7 that kills a lot of your opponent's creatures. Some of your stuff too, but you're left with this giant indestructible creature. If you are able to cast this, it's a good card. Now that's not a simple hurdle to get over. Casting it is tricky, but I don't think you have to be an actual mono black deck to play this card. I think you want to be as black heavy as possible. But you can supplement your, 12 black lands in your deck. Maybe you're like a blue-black deck where you're playing 5 or 6 blue cards and you're very, very black slanted. That's still really tough, right? Because even if you have like 5 or 6 islands in the deck, you're going to draw, 3 or 4 of those often in the early game. And every non-swamp makes this card 1 turn away from being cast. That's tough. But I think if you supplement it with 3 or 4 treasure cards, so the rats and the traders, maybe even Deadly Dispute to make a treasure, it makes it a lot more palatable. When you take this card, you kind of have to have the sense that yes, black is fairly open. I'm going to be able to get to that, 15, 16, 17 black spell count. And also I have some of those treasure cards in the pile. But if you do, yeah, I would play the card. And part of it is that you don't have to cast this on turn 5 exactly for it to be good. You want to cast it as soon as you possibly can, but casting this on turn 7, turn 8 is still going to be a pretty effective card. Next up, we've got 2 semi-related cards, flavor-wise, that were also on that list of cards that are much better in the hands of top players. Cloud and Sephiroth. So Cloud is the white 2/1 that when it enters, you search the library for an equipment, put it into your hand, and as long as Cloud is equipped, abilities of that equipment trigger twice. And I think the main thing with this card and why it's better in the hands of good players is the good players are respecting the white in the mana cost. I've had the option to take Cloud multiple times when I've been in a deck that had white mana in it, like I was like a black-white deck, and I was mostly black cards, and I didn't take it, right? I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to cast this card with consistency on turn 2, or turn 3, or turn 4, and it's still a playable card. If I was handed a Cloud at the end of the draft, I would probably still play it with enough equipment. but there was a better option in the pack. There was a good removal spell. There was a Corner by Black Mages, where that card is going to be still really good and much more consistent. So yeah, don't get too blinded by the flashy mythic symbol in this card. It's a good card, it's a solid card, but it's nothing that's busted. It's nothing you're like, I gotta play this at all costs. And a lot of time I will say, yeah, you know what, my mana base, it's not going to support a white card on turn 2 or turn 3. It loses a little bit of value there. And then Sephiroth. So Sephiroth is the 3-mana 3/3 that whenever you attack or this enters, you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, draw a card, and then has the effect whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life, and if this is the 4th time it happens, it transforms into the mega version on the backside 5/5 flyer that gives you an emblem with that same ability. So this was pretty simple. I said it gets better in the hands of top players, but it goes from being an A- on 70 lands to an A+. And I think really what makes the difference is when I've got Sephiroth, I'm actively looking for sacrifice fodder. So I'm looking for stuff like Hektize. I'm looking for stuff like Town Greeter. Even some job select equipment, like, it's not the best. You don't really feel like the equipment is giving you a full card. But if you can sacrifice the token and you're left with something lying around, that's what you want. I would imagine this is the difference maker. It could also just be that it's a kind of complicated card to play, like knowing when you should sacrifice board presence to draw a card, figuring out how to engineer a situation where you can get it to flip, or you can get it to trigger 4 times. One of the cool things actually that I noticed one of my opponents did this is they had Sephiroth and Zodiark, the last card we were talking about, the black card. And Zodiark and Sephiroth are a very good combo because almost always when you cast Zodiark, you're going to sack at least 2 things, your opponents are going to sack at least 2 things, and you get to flip the Sephiroth right away. So yeah, if I first pick Sephiroth, these foddery creatures that generate cards worth of value on entry, like Town Greeter and Hektize, those go up way in value. If you don't have those, Sephiroth's still going to be okay, but not live up to its full potential. Next up, we've got another grouping of cards here. The rares in this set that cost 7, 8, sometimes 9 mana. These game winners that are going to be ridiculous when you cast them, but are very difficult to cast. So we're talking Arden, we're talking Summon Knights of the Round, we're talking Summon Bahamut. And just like a quick note here, when I start with one of these cards, I'm immediately prioritizing card draw and ways to hit additional lands. Because naturally, over the course of a game of limited Magic, where you're going to get to turn 8, turn 9, that doesn't actually give you a very good chance of casting these cards, right? You really do need to have something to be able to grease the wheels, hit your land drops, see more cards. Otherwise, these just aren't going to work very well. So in the case of something like Summon Knights of the Round, you shouldn't really play this in any white aggro deck generally. Although I think there is an exception if you've got multiple white Aura Sites. And when I say multiple, I mean 3+. Because with multiple white Aura Sites, making additional mana, 8 mana for a game-winning card is definitely doable, right? And especially if you're a white-blue deck, where you do have access to a little bit of card selection or card draw, I would consider it there. But I wouldn't really play this in a red-white deck. I think this is going to be pretty poor there. Also, when you've got these cards like Summon Bahamut and especially Arden definitely pushes you this way, you can think about reanimating it, right? You can think about, okay, well, can I just dump it in the graveyard? Can I discard it? Can I cheat this into play somehow? That's another way I can stomach these super expensive cards. But yeah, when I start with one of these cards, or I get past one of these cards in pack 2, I know the cards I'm looking for. I'm taking the Preacher's Wanderings. I'm taking the card draw. That's what's really gonna get you to the point where these cards are castable. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in your hand way too often. Next up, we've got a pair of mythics that ask you to do something a little bit funky. So Yuna, Hope of Spira, and Terra, Magical Adept. Yuna is the 5 mana, 3 green-white, 3/5 mythic that says, on your turn, enchantment creatures in Yuna have Trample, Lifelink, and Ward 2. And at the beginning of your end step, you get to return an enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter. Terra is a 3 mana, 1 green-red, 4/2. When it enters, you mill 5 cards. You can pay 6 to transform Terra into a 6/6 flyer, where her first 3 chapters are you copy a saga you control, and it gains haste. You can put as many lore counters as you'd like on it, and then you have to sacrifice it on your end step. 4th chapter is add white, white, blue, blue, black, black, green, green, red, red, and then flip it back to Terra. So both of these cards, they do a little bit of a strange thing, right? They want you to play in this enchantment and also graveyard space. And, you're not very often going to have both of these in the same deck, but they both kind of want the same cards, right? They both really want you to play with summons. They both want you to put cards in the graveyard. Or I guess in Terra's case, doesn't really want you to put cards in the graveyard, but puts cards in the graveyard. And so cards that are good in the graveyard or other cards that care about filling the graveyard play nicely with Terra. So these 2 cards lend themselves to this sort of weird archetype space that only is really a thing with these 2 two mythics, I think. I mean, maybe there's a few little crossovers with something like Summon Titan, another rare. This is the 5-mana 7/7 trample reach that like mills a bunch of cards in the first chapter. But when you're in this kind of like Naya enchantment space, I think you can really do it. I think there's a path to have a really synergistic deck. Yuna is a solid card on her own. Like if she's just like a 5-mana 3/5 trample lifelink, that's not the worst thing in the world. Terra needs some help though. Terra really does need a lot of enchantments to make her good. If you miss on her mill, you don't draw a card off of her, it's pretty bad. So what you're looking for a Terra deck and a Yuna deck, they kind of want the same kind of cards, are cards that put cards in the graveyard, cards that care about the graveyard, and of course you want to be able to up your enchantment count as much as you can. You want to up your summon count. And this is a place where Summon Gia for free is actually going to be a pretty good card. The red 3/2/1, where the first two chapters discard a card and you can draw a card, and you get to add red mana on the last two chapters. A card that you get very late, nobody really wants. It helps you up your enchantment count for Terra, puts things in the graveyard for Yuna. These decks are often going to want to splash just so they can make sure they get enough Saga creatures in your deck. It's kind of difficult to say, I'm a Yuna deck or I'm a Terra deck on just two colors. I mean, it's possible, but you know, I was talking about Terra, the count you need to make her a good card. I think it's something like 5 or 6 enchantments at a minimum. That's a decent enough hit rate on her ability. And so if you're in this space, and I've been here exactly one time, I will pick up, you know, if I'm green-red base, I'll pick up a white enchantment. I'll pick up a white summon. These kind of decks are actually a pretty good home for Summon Primal Garuda, because that's kind of a more defensive-looking card, and, you know, this is kind of a defensive, grindy, slow, almost green-black-esque deck, right? So yeah, just kind of interesting, because they make you look at green, white, and red cards a little bit differently, a little bit more of a slow thing, a little bit more, like I said, like green-black's the kind of strategy, and I always kind of like when there's rares like this that ask you to play a color combination a little bit different than it might normally get played. Next up, we've got a group of black rares, and an uncommon that's, you know, as good as a rare here, side quest Hunt the Mark, that all kind of want the same thing. So we've got Vincent Valentine, the 4-mana 2/2 that whenever a creature your opponent controls dies, you put a number of +1/+1 counters on Vincent equal to that creature's power, and then when it attacks, it flips into a 3/2 trample lifelink that when this creature dies, turns back to the front side to Vincent. Got Xenos, which is the 5-mana 4/4 that comes in, you choose a creature your opponent controls, everything else gets -2/-2, and when that creature you chose leaves the battlefield, Xenos slips into an 8/8 flyer, and Eject. This is the 4-mana 4/3 menace that when it deals combat damage to a player, you can flip it into a ridiculous Saga 7/7 menace that makes your opponent discard cards, you draw cards, makes your opponent sacrifice things. It's just a busted card if you get to flip. So the thing that all of these cards want is removal, and you want to really, really heavily prioritize removal, right? I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, side quest Hunt the Mark, you know, that really ups my desire to pick up removal spells, and, you know, kind of sounds a little bit weird, I guess, because removal is already a very high priority, but over good creatures, I guess, is the kind of way I would put it, where if you have the decision of like, I'm blue-black, should I take a Dragoon's Wyvern or a Vane's Treachery? In a lot of spots, I would take Dragoon's Wyvern, but if I have one of these cards, I'm going to want to take the removal spell. Vincent Valentine, that one's obvious why it plays well with removal, because you kill your opponent's creatures, and Vincent grows big. Although, a little interaction to note here, with Vane's Treachery, the thing that gives -2/-2, or -6/-6 if you sacrifice a creature, it doesn't play the way you want with Vincent, because when you give something -2/-2 to kill it, or -6/-6 to kill it, that means by the time it dies, it's actually going to have 0 or negative power. So you actually won't put counters on Vincent with specifically Vane's Treachery. So that's a little thing to watch out for there. But Xenos is another card that really wants removal, and you wouldn't really think of it immediately, because you know, the big part of this card is -2/-2 to your opponent's creatures, or, you know, all creatures. And the more I play it, though, I realize, oh, you know, I'm not actually winning with my Xenos because I, you know, wiped the field. I'm winning with my Xenos because I killed one creature of theirs, but then next turn, I just cast a removal spell on the chosen creature with Xenos. I flipped into an 8/8 flyer, and I just hit them twice. And then Eject, of course. You know, you want removal with this card because you want to get your opponent's blockers out of the way. You want to make sure that menace creature actually connects. Next up is kind of a weird one here. So I've been calling out a lot of cards that are better in the hands of good players, but there's also a handful of cards that are worse in the hands of good players. And it's probably not specifically worse in the hands of good players, but more, you know, at lower ranks where you have the not so great players. Those games look a little bit different. You know, typically in lower rank games, people aren't making the attacks they should. You're not getting pressured as well as you should. People are playing more colors than they should, so games go slower, right? More clunk in the games, basically. And you get punished more often in the higher rank games for not having the right colors, not having a good curve, all that kind of stuff. So a card that falls into that, where it looks to be better in the slower games, is Jenova. This is the 2 black-green 1/5 that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on something, it becomes a mutant, and whenever a mutant dies on your turn, you draw cards equal to its power. So my hypothesis here of why this is performing not as well in maybe the higher ranked games is when you play Jenova and it just sits there, it slowly grows all your stuff, it's going to take over the game for sure. But if you play Jenova and you're only putting 1 counter on a creature per turn, it can kind of just sit there for a turn or two and not actually be that bad, right? Your opponent goes, okay, like maybe I don't answer it right away, but I'm able to answer it at some point. It doesn't just stick around forever. Also, I think in lower ranked games, people are a little more likely to just blow the removal spells on cheap creatures, not save the removal spells for cards like Jenova, and a higher ranked player is more likely just going to have the removal spell. The opponent plays Jenova, they get a counter, but then you untap and you kill Jenova, not a huge deal. I do think, though, there is something to be said about making Jenova better in your deck, and that is ways to increase Jenova's power, because it doesn't just put a +1/+1 counter on it. I think I might have even read it that way, but what the actual wording says is put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Jenova's power on up to 1 target creature. So if you have equipment, if you have ways to put +1/+1 counters on this card, it gets a lot better. So I would be looking for some of those, especially some equipment, because that's kind of the most common way that you increase power in this set. Also, a nice little thing that somebody pointed out to me is that Shambling Seath, the 3-mana 3/3 that enters tapped, and you can buy it back from your graveyard when you cast a non-creature, that's actually a mutant on its own. So if you, sack this thing to Vane's Treachery, you don't even have to put a counter on it, you can put your counter elsewhere, you get to draw 3 cards, so that's kind of cool. Next up is another card that is not particularly good, but sometimes it can make your deck if you've got the right pieces. So this is Matoya, Archon Elder. Matoya, por favor! This is the 3-mana 1/4. This is whenever you scry or surveil, draw a card. So I think you should make this card playable, just like a lot of cards we mentioned. Your count of how many scry and surveil effects you need has to be fairly high. If this is a 1/4 that just sits there for a few turns, that's going to tank your win rate. Just having this kind of vanilla creature, you don't want that. So I think your count of surveilling and scry has to be fairly high. So I'm talking, 5 or 6. But really the card I think you're most looking to pair with Matoya is Ilmeg Pixie, the 2-mana 2/1 flying. That whenever it attacks, you surveil 1. Because this is a repeatable surveil scry. And it's a nice little curve, right? Going Pixie into Matoya, draw a card right away. So if you have 2 Pixies, I can see Matoya. But this is, again, another one of those cards where Matoya's not a card that people want. You get it pretty late. And I could see it being better than your 23rd card. It's not something I think you actively want to go for, though. And then the last card I want to call out here, and I've given you the readable version of it because, this is a bonus sheet card, and most of these cards are not very readable. Winota, Joiner of Forces. I want to just give a quick PSA on this because I've gotten this card passed to me a lot in Pack 1. I also looked on 17 lands to see the average last taken, just where people are taking this card on average, and it's pretty late. It's like 3rd or 4th pick, and that's extremely late for one of the best cards in the set. This card is busted good. This card is really, really strong. For those who don't know Winota, it's the 4-mana 4/4 that whenever you attack with a non-human creature, you look at the top 6 cards of your library, you put a human from those onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking, and those humans gain indestructible until end of turn. I had a draft. I was doing a coaching session earlier this week. We had a draft where we were blue-white, pretty straightforward blue-white, until Pack 3, and we got past the Winota. And we had 5 or 6 blue cards, and I was like, you know what? It's actually probably worth giving up these blue cards, trying to play Winota, pick up whatever red cards we can pick up this pack, and, whatever white cards too. Because, yeah, if you can enable this card, and it's very easy to enable this card in this set. In red-white, the job select equipment, those are non-humans, right? And there's quite a few humans as well running around in this set. It's not hard to fulfill that nice even split. So yeah, I would first pick this card very happily. If I got it past to me, I was already kind of in the white artifact space, definitely looking to play this card. And yeah, just wanted to give that quick PSA. Anyways, thank you for watching and listening, everybody. We've made it to the end here. And I think this is probably going to be my last Final Fantasy episode. Maybe I touch on it for something here and there, but I said most of it I feel like I have to say about this set. That being said, if there is a topic you feel like I haven't covered and you have to hear some words on, specifically about Final Fantasy, let me know. Maybe that'll be next week's episode if there's a good enough idea in the comments. But I might also just transition to the generic level up episodes, right? The set agnostic ones. I have a few in my back pocket that I've been meaning to get to. And yeah, those are always fun to do. So yeah, thank you for watching and listening. If you made it this far, check out that Patreon. And, if you're on YouTube, comment, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good day.